A Java with John, a Java with John. Grab a cup of Java and sit on down and have some Java with John. Hello, my name is John, and this is my Java. Welcome to another episode of Java with John. First, I ask you to excuse my voice a little bit because it's still, for some reason, a little bit hoarse. So I want to continue our last week's discussion about the functional analysis or the ABC analysis. I want to highlight a couple of things. First of all, before we move on, and these highlights again are, A is antecedent, B is behavior, C is consequence. And this process could be used to track negative behavior. It could also be used to track positive behavior. And one thing in terms of behavior, a couple of things I didn't mention last week is behaviors can also be physically aggressive behaviors such as punching, hitting, kicking, spitting, throwing things, property damage, etc., etc. But these things can also be addictive behavior such as drinking, drug abuse, sexual addiction, gambling addiction, food addictions, whatever other kind of addictions you may be dealing with would also come about in the behavior portion of the section. So what I want to talk about today a little bit is how to track the functional analysis so that it's useful and it's a helpful document. Now, child and youth care workers, you can use this. Social workers, you could use this with your clients. You could use this on yourself if you're trying to track your habits, maybe track addictive behavior. Perhaps you want to track your spouse's behavior. Or you may want to use it to track things at work. So anytime where you're trying to track a behavior, whether it's, again, positive or negative, you can use this functional analysis. What I would suggest you do at first, and unfortunately my printer's not working out, I printed out a sheet to kind of hold up to the camera and show you guys, but take a sheet of paper, make it landscape, because that's what it's called on the computer, landscape, so it's shorter, up, down, longer, left to right. And make 5 columns. Now, probably easier to do this on a computer. Make 5 columns on that sheet. On the top, you may want to write client name or name if it's your name. You may want to write the date. And if there's a particular behavior you're tracking, you may want to write something like behavior tracking and then write the behavior that you're tracking. For clients who are maybe new into care, or clients you are trying to figure out what behaviors need to be tracked, what behaviors need to be, modified. You may not want to track a particular behavior at first, unless they're coming in, say, with suicidal ideations, violent tendencies, drug abuse issues, alcohol abuse issues. Then those behaviors you may want to track from the start in terms of using the functional analysis. Now, what you're going to want to do on the 5 columns is first you want to put the time. And then again, I would say maybe 10 rows. Because the other thing I want to say about, and maybe this is just a visual thing for me, but I think as days go on, we want to make our chart smaller and smaller and have people write smaller and smaller. But sometimes when you make a chart and maybe you put 15 or 20 rows on this sucker, people might not have the space to write what they need to write in the chart or what would be helpful in the chart. So try to make the chart spacious so that people don't feel like they have to edit themselves when they're writing. So again, first column would be for the time of day. Second column would be for the antecedent/trigger. Third column would be for the behavior. And you may want to put behavior, nonverbal and verbal, so people know that you're tracking both, or verbal and physical, however you want to term it. Your fourth column is going to be for the consequences. Now, the fifth column will be for comments. Some people may want the fifth column for comments. Some other people may not want the fifth column for comments. That's kind of up to you. But for sure, the 4 columns. Because sometimes when you're trying to baseline these behaviors, when you're trying to track these behaviors, sometimes the time of day itself will be the antecedent. So, how are you going to track this? So I'm going to give you an example of a behavior. Say you are tracking a client's violent behavior at the group home, for example. You may want to, again, keep track of the antecedents. So if the client gets violent at chore time, what you're going to do is, under the time of day, you might be writing 4 p.m. Antecedent, asked to do chore. Behavior, then you're going to write down all the stuff he does. If it's nonverbal or physical, verbal, whatever word you want to use. If he kicks, if he spits, if she has flared nostrils, if he swears, yells, threatens, kicks, punches, whatever behaviors you see in that time frame, you're going to want to write those down. Under consequences, you're going to write what happened as a result of the behavior. What did you do? Did you just allow natural consequences to take place? Did you allow him to cool down? Because allowing him to cool down could be a good thing. Be a consequence, is giving him time and then to process. Did you perhaps help him do his chore? Did you give him an extra chore? Did you give him maybe some consequences if he got violent and hit somebody? Was there a restraint involved? So those types of things you're going to track under consequence. And the reason why is, say if you notice over the week that 5 out of 7 times he got violent when he was asked to do his chore, then you might figure, okay, and say the chore was, he got violent and the chore was at 2 o'clock, and Sunday he got violent, the chore was at 6 o'clock. So it might not be the time. However, if you notice it's every day after school, you ask him to do the chore and it's 4 o'clock and he gets violent, then it could be the time of day. It could be the fact that he doesn't want to do his chore. Could be something that happened at school. So it's really important to kind of keep those tracks. The other thing I would say, whenever possible, even under time of day, you may want to write down the staff involved. So again, if you have the comment section, you may want to write down the name of the staff that was involved in the incident, because it could be the staff triggering the client. It could be, if you're mother and father, it could be the father that's triggering your child, where if the mother asks, it might get a different response, or vice versa. So that's in terms of children. Now, say, for example, if you have problems with an addiction, let's use alcoholism, for example. I know one thing that they try to do in various models, matrix models, one I read about a little bit. I know there's other models, but they really want the alcoholic to identify their trigger. So if you can identify the trigger, it's a lot easier to change the behavior. So again, if you're tracking alcoholism, again, you might backslide a little bit here and there before you get a handle on the trigger. But write down the trigger. Say, for example, the trigger is an argument with your wife. That could be the antecedent. Again, write down the time of day. Antecedent could be argument with wife. Behavior could be, I grabbed a drink. I grabbed a couple of drinks, or I grabbed a 6-pack and drank it and I got drunk. That could very well be the behavior at first. Or the behavior would be, I called my sponsor from AA and talked to them. Consequence, well, if you drank, say you got drunk. Next day you were late for work and got maybe a letter on your file for being late for work, or got a warning for being late for work. That's part of the consequence. Even though it's the next day, that's a consequence of you getting drunk. Perhaps you talked to your sponsor and you decided not to get drunk. So you're going to write that down too. You're going to write down, did not get drunk. Consequence is, made a plan to go to an AA meeting tomorrow. So again, the thing is, and I really hit on a very important point here. Track positive behavior as well. Even with that child who's violent. If he's asked, if you figure out it's chore time and you ask him to do his chore and he does the chore, write that down and track it down. He does the chore with no violence. And write down how you responded, what the consequence was. Maybe it's like you gave him a high five, or gave him some extra one-to-one time, or took him out for an ice cream, whatever was appropriate in your setting. Because again, group home versus regular home, there's different boundaries, different guidelines, different rules. Track that positive behavior. If you have an addiction, like again, alcoholism, if you didn't go for that drink, write it down, track it down. This could be part of your journal that you keep every day. And perhaps star it. If you see a positive behavior by a negative trigger, put a star there. Put a star there and give yourself praise that, you know what, that time I didn't take a drink. Or for that child, that time he didn't get violent. Make sure there's some what we call positive reinforcement attached to that situation. Again, positive reinforcement is an introduction of a stimulus to maintain or increase a behavior. So make sure if you're that alcoholic or that drug user or a person who has an eating disorder, gambling disorder, whatever it is, make sure you give yourself positive. Even if it's a pat on the back, even if it's to tell your friends that, hey, I did good. Whatever it may be, to tell your family, hey, I did good. To tell your sponsor, hey, I did good. If it's if it's an alcohol addiction, maybe, your reward will be you're going to take you and your wife out for dinner because you survived this episode. Whatever it's going to be, so that it increases your chance the next time to avoid that negative behavior. Give little Bobby a praise for not hitting. Or perhaps little Bobby hit once and ran away to his room, where before he would hit 3 or 4 times and not run away to his room till he does the restraint. Say, Bobby, thanks. You know what? You hit. Hitting is wrong, but you know what? You left after. Thank you for doing that. Thank you. I appreciate the fact that I didn't have to restrain you, and thank you for helping me do that. Maybe let's go read a book together, or let's sit down and have a milk and cookies together, whatever it may be. Because that positive praise, that positive reinforcement is really going to be helpful. If you got to do reports, if you got to hold yourself accountable for something, tracking the positive is going to be just as powerful, if not more powerful, than tracking the negative. So that's really all I wanted to say about the functional analysis. It can be used in so many ways, so many different situations. Really, you just be creative. Whenever there's a behavior, there's always an antecedent, there's always a consequence. You can always use the functional analysis. And before I noticed when I said the functional analysis, I almost made the curve of a woman. Well, the functional analysis is beautiful, and so are women. Anyways, to all my broasters with the coasters, zap that like button, because I like you. And remember, be yourself, because nobody else can.